Hello, my friend just told me that I look like a wealthy yet sinister widow who maybe just killed her husband and buried him in the backyard because he was mismanaging our fortune. And I'm not any of that, and this is all alleged, but I'm feeling that energy today, and I hope that you're on board with me. Hi, my name is Legia. I'm a real-life lawyer, and I'm on a mission to demystify the law and how it affects your everyday life. Today, I want to talk to you about the Bella Thorne scandal, OnlyFans, and sex worker rights. Before we get started, I do want to note that I'm a lawyer and not a sex worker, and I don't pretend to speak for them. I am here to talk about the legality of sex work, the various models, and sex worker rights, and how it relates to this Bella Thorne controversy. I encourage you to follow actual sex workers and learn from them because they're the ones whose voices have been marginalized. A few that I follow that I highly recommend include Lady Rue, Elle Stanger, also known as Stripper Writer, and Political Stripper on Instagram. So go follow them on Instagram, support them on Patreon or wherever they have platforms, and learn from them as much as you can. In fact, I'm gonna go against YouTube guidelines and say, if you'd rather learn from them, go now. Yeah, that's right, I'm saying it. X out this video and go learn from actual sex workers. Do it. Alright, if you're still here with me, I'll tell you a few things. Please note though that I am a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. Nothing that I say should be construed as legal advice. You should always talk to a licensed attorney if you have any legal questions. If you find this video helpful or entertaining, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to hear more from me. I'm sweating. Okay, so let's just start from the beginning. Who the hell is Bella Thorne? I had never heard of this human until about a week ago, but I looked it up. She's 22, she's a former Disney Channel star, and once I read that, I got bored and I quit reading. I will note, however, that she is a Libra, and this is some serious, unevolved Libra energy. Yeah, I said it. All right, what is OnlyFans? So OnlyFans is a subscription-based platform where people can sign up and pay a monthly subscription to receive content from creators. Creators can also create pay-per-view content where they give a little teaser, maybe it's a photo, maybe it's a video, and their supporters can pay a little extra fee to see the content. Basically, it's like Patreon, but you can post not safe for work content on it. You can technically use it to post anything that you think people will pay money to see, but it seems to be predominantly not safe for work content on there, or pictures of feet. And OnlyFans has been used by sex workers, especially in the wake of FOSTA SESTA legislation, but we'll get into that in a minute. All right, so what did Bella Thorne do on OnlyFans? So she said that she was doing research for a project wherein she was going to play a sex worker. So she wanted to go on OnlyFans as a means of learning what it's like to be a sex worker. So she creates a profile. She starts charging people $20 a month to see her content. From what I've heard, it's pretty innocent, her in some bikinis, stuff like that. Then, however, allegedly she starts offering pay-per-view content, saying that it's a nude photo of her. A lot of people pay a lot of money to see this nude photo, and it turns out that it wasn't a nude photo. So that prompted a lot of people to request their money back. And so many people requested their money back that it prompted OnlyFans to completely change their operating procedures. So now instead of paying people who are earning money on the platform every week, they're only paying them every 30 days. And they put significant limits on the amount that people can charge for pay-per-view content and the amount that people can get tipped on the website. So you can see how Bella Thorne went in there and basically broke OnlyFans for all the people who use it as a means of actually supporting themselves. So sex workers are pissed off, and for a good reason. She exploited this industry for research purposes, and this research was performative at best because she's white, rich, skinny, a celebrity. Her experience on OnlyFans is not going to be the same as an actual sex worker. So she's not actually learning what it's like to be a sex worker by creating this OnlyFans account. She was also able to promote her OnlyFans on her other platforms, which gave her a lot of reach, but also a lot of sex workers aren't able to promote themselves on other platforms for fear of being outed or for fear of violating terms of service on places like Instagram or Twitter and having their entire account taken down or blacklisted. A lot of times celebrities, especially if they're rich, skinny, and white, don't have to worry as much about getting blacklisted for some reason. And OnlyFans is one of a limited number of websites that still exist on the internet where sex workers can feasibly maintain a living. And that brings us to sex worker rights. So full-service sex work, that is sex for money, is illegal in the United States. Creating and producing obscene images is another story. I defined obscenity in a previous video, but basically anything that appeals to the prurient interest in sex and is about sex technically is obscene in this country, and the buying and selling and production of it is illegal on the federal level. However, places like Nevada and California obviously have more lax standards because that's where a lot of pornography is created in the United States, and in Nevada, sex work is legal. So though on the federal level, the creation of obscene materials is illegal, there are different states that have different laws around it, and also on the federal level, the at least in my experience, the main focus has been on prosecuting child exploitation, because that is a completely different subject. And there are so many horrifying people who are exploiting children right now that the government kind of has their hands full on that. They're not going to be going around prosecuting adults for taking topless selfies, for example, typically. Again, this is not legal advice. So I just wanted to bring that up to differentiate between the creation of obscene content, so pornography, for example, and the laws that criminalize sex work. Because the laws that criminalize sex work, at least in the United States, are written about full service sex work, that is sex for money, or what the laws like to call prostitution. So most states criminalize sex work, and I'll look to my home state of Minnesota for an example of a law that criminalizes sex work. It is pretty typical, and I'll read it to you. Whoever, while acting as a patron, intentionally does any of the following is guilty of a misdemeanor: engages in prostitution with an individual 18 years of age or older, or hires, offers to hire, or agrees to hire an individual 18 years of age or older to engage in sexual penetration or sexual contact. A person who is convicted of violating this paragraph must, at a minimum, be sentenced to pay a fine of at least $500. So that's penalties for the patrons of sex workers. It differentiates between people who are 18 years of age or older and 18 years of age or under, because the penalties for engaging in sex with a minor are obviously much, much higher under these statutes. So that's why there's that language about 18 or older, because there's a separate statute for 18 or under. So then for the sex workers themselves, the statute says whoever, while acting as a prostitute, intentionally does any of the following is guilty of a misdemeanor: engages in prostitution with an individual 18 years of age or older, or is hired, offers to be hired, or agrees to be hired by an individual 18 years of age or older to engage in sexual penetration or sexual contact. You can also get a driving citation if you're found to be soliciting sex workers while using your vehicle, and there's also a statute criminalizing loitering for the purposes of obtaining clients as a sex worker. So that's kind of your typical law in the United States that criminalizes sex work. So we move on to the Nordic Model, which is a popular model that a lot of people point to, saying it's a better way to criminalize sex work, except for sex workers who say that it is not useful at all. So the Nordic Model criminalizes the patrons, the clients of sex workers, but not the sex workers themselves, which you'd think, hey, you know, that's a great way to make sure that the sex workers themselves aren't being criminalized, but you'd be wrong. Sex workers are still being criminalized under this model. The prosecution of clients leads to the surveillance of sex workers in order to get to clients. It also outs sex workers in order to get to clients, and pulls sex workers into the criminal justice process as witnesses. And police particularly prey on sex workers who are more vulnerable, such as migrants, which can lead to consequences like deportation. Even Amnesty International has called for the end of the Nordic Model because it does not comply with international human rights standards. All right, so Nordic Model, it's a no. What about legalization as opposed to decriminalize? And we'll get to the difference in a bit. Legalization is what has happened in Nevada, for example. Legalization regulates sex work. It regulates where, when, and how sex work can occur, and it's also not favored by sex workers. So it still criminalizes sex workers who don't fulfill specific bureaucratic responsibilities, because once you put regulations in place, then there's all sorts of issues that come in with employment law and things like that, and getting registered with the government as a business entity, filing taxes, which would require you to identify yourself as a sex worker to the federal government. And this disproportionately excludes sex workers who are already marginalized, like sex workers who use drugs or those who are undocumented. So this makes their situation more precarious, and it puts more power in the hands of managers, people who often are able to exert a lot of control over sex workers in these situations. It puts the power in the hands of those managers and in the hands of the state over sex workers' rights and their ability to do their jobs. So ultimately, decriminalization is the model that, at least from what I've read, most sex workers support. Places like New Zealand have decriminalized sex work. Decriminalization means taking away the statutes that make sex work a crime. So you're not creating new regulations to control sex work, you're just making sex work not a crime. And this empowers sex workers, rather than the state, like in the legalization model, to have control over the means of their work. It also recognizes that sex workers are the best people to advise and control their working conditions, because they know what they need and what will make them feel safe. And not criminalizing sex work means that coming forward, if you've been abused as a sex worker, will be a lot easier, and it will increase transparency, because sex workers are able to report abuse without having to worry about being criminalized themselves. Studies have shown that decriminalization has improved relations between sex workers and cops. It also allows sex workers to better strategize their safety. For example, they can have a conversation with a client on the street instead of having to rush through out of fear of being caught by the cops. And no evidence has been found that the decriminalization of sex work has led to a larger proliferation of sex workers or the proliferation of sex trafficking. All that it's done is made sex workers safer. So hopefully that overview gives you an idea of the different models for regulating sex work and shows too how ineffectual our model here in the United States is. Added on to the trash heap that is the United States model for regulating sex work was FOSTA and SESTA in 2017. FOSTA SESTA, FOSTA in the House, SESTA in the Senate, it's the same legislation, was passed in 2017 as a means of trying to curb sex trafficking online, but it hurt sex workers in the process. So let's back up. There's this law called the Communications Decency Act, and Section 230 of that act has created a lot of controversy since its inception in the 1990s. I'm not going to go into depth on CDA 230. If you hear what I'm saying today and you want to learn more, I'll link it down below, but there's this book called The 26 Words That Created the Internet by Jeff Kosseff, and it is about CDA 230, and it goes really in depth about the whole act and the history of it. For now, what you need to know is that CDA 230 created a wall against liability for internet service providers, website hosts, platforms basically. So places like Facebook cannot have liability for the things that people post onto their platform. So if I were to post something defamatory and someone wanted to sue me about it, they could not also sue Facebook about it, for example. It protects websites from liability for the things that third parties post on the site. And this has allowed for the proliferation of the internet as we know today. Things like Facebook probably wouldn't be able to exist if they didn't have the protection against liability for the things that other people were posting on their site. However, what that also means is that a lot of abuse has been able to proliferate on websites and they haven't had to face any consequences for it. Awful things, illegal things happen on the internet, and oftentimes people are very good at hiding their identity, so it's hard to find a perpetrator to sue. So when you want to sue the website that is allowing people to post this heinous stuff on their site, they say, well, CDA 230, you can't sue me. And usually they're right. So it's created this shield from liability for all of the abuses that you've seen or heard of happening on the internet. And so there are a lot of critics of CDA 230, and there's been a recent push actually to reform it. The most recent reform of CDA 230 was FOSTA. And in part it says, whoever owns, manages, or operates an interactive computer service with the intent to promote or facilitate the prostitution of another person shall be fined under this title, imprisoned for not more than 10 years, or both. So basically, FOSTA created a carve-out exception to the complete bar of liability for websites, saying you're not going to be liable for the things that third parties post on your sites except for when it is facilitating the prostitution of another person. FOSTA was passed because there was a huge push, especially from mothers and concerned citizens who wanted to protect children from sex trafficking online. This is, of course, a huge concern. There definitely should be some sort of regulation or something to prevent sex trafficking from proliferating online. The problem is that prostitution and sex trafficking have always been kind of intermingled in our minds and in our laws in a way that is creating a lot of problems for sex workers, because there's a huge difference between consensual sex work and sex trafficking. One is a heinous crime, the other is a contract between two consenting adults. For some reason, our lawmakers don't really seem to get that. So the effect of FOSTA was immediate. There were a number of websites that were used by sex workers, but also by sex traffickers as a means of finding clients. And those websites did not have the capacity to hire enough people to sift through posts to be able to take down the ones that violated this new law. So instead they closed down entirely. The two most prominent sites that closed down were the Craigslist Personals and a website called Backpage. These two sites also happened to be sites that sex workers used quite often to connect with potential clients. This not only meant that sex workers lost income, but also it pushed the most vulnerable sex workers who didn't have any alternatives out on the streets, making it a lot more dangerous for them, and it led to reported abuse and death of sex workers. And it's still unclear as to whether the law actually really helped to curb sex trafficking, but it is clear that it did hurt sex workers. So this is where sites like OnlyFans and other ones like Patreon and Instagram come in. They're platforms that sex workers can use in order to connect with clients safely on the internet so that they can have conversations and conduct background checks on people before meeting them in person. It also allows them to make money without having to have in-person contact with people, which is really important when we're in the middle of a pandemic. These sites help to fill the void that sites like Craigslist and Backpage left when they shuttered. And OnlyFans is one that is super accessible, super popular, and whose terms of service are more lenient towards not safe for work content. So when celebrities like Bella Thorne come in and exploit this platform as a means of researching for projects and cause the amount of damage that she caused, it further marginalizes a community that's been struggling to make it already. So hopefully, if nothing else, we can learn from this moment, take it as an opportunity to talk about sex worker rights and why this matters so much, and push for a little bit more change. I hope that you found this informative informative and that you've learned something. I also hope that you do go to those accounts that I mentioned earlier, and I'll link them down below, because they're a source of a lot of knowledge, and those are the voices from the actual community that you need to be listening to and concerned with, and that lawmakers need to be listening to. There's a number of different articles that I used to help me research this, and I'll link them down below too. If you found this helpful or entertaining, please hit the thumbs up below and subscribe if you want to hear more from me. Thank you so much for joining. Support sex workers. Have a great day. Goodbye.